Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive guest appearances from legendary guitarist, composer, and band leader Allan Holdsworth. And this is a follow-up to the last one that I did, where I discussed Allan Holdsworth's impressive work as a sideman, where he wasn't the leader and he was featured on an artist album or as part of a band where he was featured as a sideman. And as impressive as Allan Holdsworth's work as a sideman is, and trust me when I tell you, they're legendary. I feel that some of Allan Holdsworth's best guitar playing came as a guest. And you look at the body of work that Allan Holdsworth put together as a guest, it's absolutely amazing. And you look at all of the different styles that Allan Holdsworth played in as a guest, whether it was jazz, fusion, progressive rock, metal, you name it. Allan Holdsworth played all different styles and was, in my honest opinion, a musical chameleon, somebody who could adapt or play in any kind of situation and would thrive in that environment. And Allan Holdsworth was definitely a musical chameleon, incredibly versatile, amazingly fearless. Allan Holdsworth wasn't afraid of trying out different styles of music to perfect his guitar playing. And when you have somebody like Allan Holdsworth as a guest on an album, that band or that artist may not be well known, but somebody could pick up that album and say to themselves, just like I said before, where Allan Holdsworth was featured as a sideman, they could look at that album and say, well, I don't really know that band or that artist, but Allan Holdsworth plays on it, so it must be good. And Allan Holdsworth's guest track was always the highlight of that album. And Allan Holdsworth, as I said before, he was like the ultimate weapon for a band, almost like a secret weapon. Everybody would be doing their thing, playing great, and then halfway in, Allan Holdsworth would quietly come to the forefront, blow everybody away with the most jaw-dropping guitar solo you've ever heard, and after that, he would just step back into the shadows and just let everybody else do their thing. And that's what made Allan Holdsworth such a special musician. He had that ability to make everybody around him better players. He made everything sound fantastic. And just his mere presence alone really made everything all that better. And the only other guitarist I can think of who has that kind of ability is the legendary Pat Metheny. Just their name alone commands great respect and creates such a buzz. And Allan Holdsworth was definitely in that category. Just his name alone would get everybody excited and buzzing and saying to themselves, oh, look, Allan Holdsworth's on that album. I've got to check that out. That's going to be really good. And there's always a great sense of excitement when Allan Holdsworth is a guest. Don't get me wrong, I loved his work as a sideman, some of the best music he's been part of. But some of my favorite stuff from Allan Holdsworth was when he played as a guest. And, Allan Holdsworth was definitely a team player. He was one of those guys, he could play for the music, give you the greatest solo you've ever heard, and that would be it. Allan Holdsworth wasn't a demanding guy. He didn't have like big expectations. You ask him, "Hey, Alan, I've got this album. Can you lay down a guitar solo for me?" And Alan would be like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." And he was his own worst critic because, he could give you the greatest solo you've ever heard, and he could turn back and say, "Yeah, that wasn't that good." But to us, it would be like, "Holy cow, did you hear that solo Allan Holdsworth put down? That was incredible." But Allan Holdsworth was the opposite of that. He pretty much hated everything he ever did, even though to us, they were some of his best stuff he'd ever put out. So, what I've decided to do is I'm going to take a handful of albums where Allan Holdsworth is a featured guest. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album slash guest appearance individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. When you've got someone like Allan Holdsworth, who's done a lot of work as a guest, it's very hard to choose which one to go with or where to start. So I've tasked myself with a massive challenge to handpick some of not necessarily just my favorite guest appearances, but some of the ones that are high profile. A few of them are my favorites. Some of them are not that well known, although some of you out there may have heard of them. And I'm going to choose which one I think is the best one. This is not going to be easy for me because there's so many guest appearances to choose from. And some of these albums where Allan Holdsworth is a featured guest, he is usually on one track, sometimes two, sometimes three, or maybe four, or he could be on half of the album. So he could play on maybe the first half of the album, or he could be playing on the second half of the album. So, Allan Holdsworth as a guest was just as important as a sideman because he could really lend his magic to whomever he was playing with. And the person he would work with, they would get better. Everybody around him got better. And of course, Allan Holdsworth just did what he always did best, and that's blow everyone away with his jaw dropping guitar playing. So we are going to start with the first guest appearance, and this one came out in 1977, and this one is called Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean. Now, I have always said that some of Holdsworth's best guitar playing was with violin players, and Jean-Luc Ponty is no exception. Jean-Luc Ponty, one of the greatest violin players of all time, and him and Holdsworth together was just magic. And the interesting thing about Allan Holdsworth, he also is a great violin player himself. And, hearing Holdsworth and Ponty trading solos back and forth and melodies as well is absolutely amazing. And, you get two great players in Holdsworth and Ponty, you're going to get something really special. And Enigmatic Ocean is definitely a special album. Allan Holdsworth is featured on 4 tracks, and he also plays alongside another guitarist who would end up as a live musician for legendary progressive rock band Genesis, and that is, of course, Daryl Stuermer. Now, Daryl Stuermer and Allan Holdsworth are two completely different guitar players, but on Enigmatic Ocean, they worked really well together, and their styles are very different, but they complement each other. So they don't necessarily step on each other's toes. So, you've got the more jazzy approach of Holdsworth, and you've got the more rocky approach of Daryl Stuermer. But as I said, they don't step on each other's toes. They give each other a lot of space to do their thing. And my goodness, there is a good reason why a lot of people hold this album in such high regard. Aside from the fact it's a great album from Jean-Luc Ponty, the very fact that you've got Allan Holdsworth on this album just makes it even more better. And as I said, Allan Holdsworth is featured on 4 songs, and the 4 tracks are Enigmatic Ocean Part 2 and Enigmatic Ocean Part 3 and Nostalgic Lady and The Struggle of the Turtle to the Sea Part 3. So 4 outstanding songs featuring Allan Holdsworth, and he just absolutely rips it up as only Holdsworth can. Now, in 1977, Allan Holdsworth kind of had his sound, but it wasn't quite there yet. You could still hear it's him, very much so, but not quite there yet. I wouldn't necessarily say, was this the album that Holdsworth really came out to play? No, it isn't. But Holdsworth's sound was still a work in progress, and his solos on this album are just incredible. Hearing him and Sturmer ripping it up, absolutely amazing. And the standouts for me of Holdsworth's guitar playing are Nostalgic Lady and The Struggle of the Turtle to the Sea. Absolutely love it. Enigmatic Ocean Part 2 and 3, they're equally as good as well. But those 2 tracks that I mentioned really stood out to me. And like I said, anytime that Holdsworth and Ponty hooked up, you knew it was going to be good. And like I said, Holdsworth's a great violin player as well, criminally underrated. And Ponty, one of the best violin players on the planet, and he's done some excellent music as well. So there you have it. Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean, a fantastic Holdsworth guest appearance recording, and some amazing playing from the man himself. So there you have it. Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean. Absolutely love this one. One of my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearances. Tremendous stuff. So we are going to move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 1978, and this one is called Gong Espresso 2. So Holdsworth had already played with Gong on their album called Gong Gazoos, and this album features Holdsworth on 3 tracks, and we've also got another guest on this album, and that is, of course, another violin player from another great progressive rock band, and that is Curved Air. And the violin player featured on this album is Darrell Way. So Holdsworth is featured on 3 tracks on Gong Espresso 2, and the highlight for me is the track that features Holdsworth and Way. You know, as I said about Holdsworth playing with Ponty, it's magic. And as I said already, you know, Allan Holdsworth works very well with violin players, which is no surprise because Holdsworth himself is a violin player. And hearing Holdsworth and Darrell Way together is amazing. And I kind of look at this as a little warm up for what he would do with Eddie Jobson in UK. Just that whole guitar and violin, you know, the styles, especially when you get to incredible players like Allan Holdsworth and Darrell Way together, doesn't get any better than that. And like I said, Holdsworth is featured on 3 tracks on Gong Espresso 2. And the tracks that he's featured on this album are Sleepy, Solly, and Three Blind Mice. But they're only 3 tracks, but they're excellent. And, you know, Holdsworth playing with Gong, you get to hear a different side to his guitar playing. So With gong, it's a lot more experimental, a lot more laid back, is a lot more percussion driven. There's lots of xylophones and vibraphones and all sorts of different things going on. It's very percussion based, but Holdsworth, as always, he thrives and adapts to any situation you put him in. And to hear Holdsworth in experimental mode is quite a nice treat, actually, because it's not really something you get to hear much with Holdsworth. Obviously, Holdsworth is an improviser through and through. You get to hear him doing that with gong, especially with these guys, and he just feels right at home. You don't ever think to yourself, Holdsworth don't sound right in this situation. No, 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 no. Holdsworth, put him in any situation, he's going to adapt, he's going to thrive, because you wouldn't have it any other way. Certainly a very unique guitar player. You put any style in front of Holdsworth, he just nails it without even thinking or hesitating twice. He said, "Yep, I'm doing that." Done. And with gong, it's no exception. And he just sounds right at home with Pierre Millin and all of these incredible musicians. And as I said, there are only 3 tracks, but the standout track for me is Sleepy. It's just really good, and hearing Holdsworth burning it up on the guitar is just absolutely amazing. So there you have it. Gong Espresso 2, very experimental, but very enjoyable nonetheless. Tremendous Holdsworth guest appearance album, in my opinion, and it wouldn't be the last time we would see Holdsworth mixing up with the Gong guys, which we'll get to later on. But for now, Gong Espresso 2, very enjoyable, and some great playing, of course, from Holdsworth. Absolutely love this one. So we move on to the next one, and this one came out in 1979, and this one is called Gong, Time is the Key. So once again, Allan Holdsworth is back playing with the guys in Gong. So by this point, this is now Pierre Millin's Gong. So this is kind of like the whole transitional thing from what Gong was before to Pierre Millin's Gong. So this signified that this is now more Pierre Millin's band. And there's some really good music here. A little bit more out there than Gong Espresso 2, but some really good music here. And once again, we're hearing Allan Holdsworth in experimental mode, and there's some really good playing. And he's featured on 3 tracks, but they're really good tracks. And Holdsworth is a bit more in the background than he was on Gong Espresso 2, but he still plays great. So we've got Arabesque intro and Arabesque, and then we've got Encerilla 2 and the title track Time is the Key. But Holdsworth, as always, plays excellent. He's on top form, and he worked really well with these guys. Considering that the guys from Gong and Allan Holdsworth, they're both from completely different worlds, but yet they work so well together. It's quite amazing, because I think with Allan Holdsworth and Gong, although they have very different, unique backgrounds from a musical point of view, there's just something about them. They've got a really good rapport, and it just works. I don't know how, can't really explain it, but there's just something about Holdsworth and Gong. It just works. Maybe it's the whole improvisation thing, perhaps, but they just work really, really well together. And I think with Holdsworth collaborating with the guys in Gong, it made him, I wouldn't say a better player. He's always been a great player, but I think he just made him different, just made him a different kind of guitar player, and he took some of those influences and applied it to his own stuff. And, they just work well together. It's just magic. But as I said, Pierre Millin's Gong, very different. Holdsworth, very different, but put them together, it's magic. So there you have it. Pierre Malin's Gong, Time is the Key, tremendous album, great guest appearance from Holdsworth, and standout track for me is Arabesque intro and Arabesque. It's a really good track, and Time is the Key as well. It's a really good track as well. But I think Arabesque intro and Arabesque is really good. So there you have it. Pierre Malin's Gong, Time is the Key. Great Holdsworth guest appearance album, in my opinion. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1981, and this one is called Soft Machine, Land of Cocaine. So Soft Machine had been away for a number of years, after 75, but they got back together for this one-off album in 1981, and it's pretty much a Carl Jenkins solo project, but it's got all the Soft Machine guys. They're all back. Of course, no Soft Machine album is ever truly complete without the legendary John Marshall on drums, and Allan Holdsworth came back for this little reunion, so to speak. And Allan Holdsworth on this album, Land of Cocaine, he's more of a session musician. He's not necessarily part of the band, whereas with Soft Machine Bundles, he was very much a member of that band and played a massive part on that album. On Land of Cocaine, he's featured on a couple of tracks, and he sounds amazing. And this album, a lot more jazzier, very orchestral, quite laid back in some areas, but Holdsworth just sounds amazing. And, that's the thing about Allan Holdsworth. He can adapt to any environment you put him in, and he just thrives. And hearing Allan Holdsworth playing alongside an orchestra, it's not something you heard often, but holy cow, does he sound excellent on this one. And he's on a couple of tracks, as I mentioned. He's on Black Velvet Mountain, which has got some burning guitar playing, and he's on another track called Sly Monkey. So two great tracks from Holdsworth. But as I said, it's a very commercial album and a lot more laid back than some of Soft Machine's previous albums. But you have Soft Machine, you have Allan Holdsworth, it's going to be good, and this doesn't disappoint. And the standout track for me from Land of Cocaine is Black Velvet Mountain. I just think he really burns it up on that track, and it's a real nice treat. Absolutely loved it. And, Holdsworth and Soft Machine have a long history together. Holdsworth's always collaborated with these guys in various different situations and a number of different offshoots, most notably Softworks. But, they're all great players. What more can you say, really? So there you have it. Soft Machine, Land of Cocaine. Great guest appearance from Holdsworth, and very commercial album for Holdsworth, in my opinion. And his guitar playing, as always, the highlights of the entire album. So there you have it. Soft Machine, Land of Cocaine. Great Holdsworth guest appearance, in my opinion. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 1983, and this one is called Jean-Luc Ponty, Individual Choice. Anytime Holdsworth and Ponty are together, it's magic, and this album is no exception. Now, whereas with Enigmatic Ocean, Holdsworth was on a lot more. Individual Choice, he's only on 2 tracks, but wow, what 2 tracks we got here. And Holdsworth and Ponty, just magic, just absolute magic, in my opinion. And the 2 tracks he's featured on are Nostalgia, which is one of the greatest Jean-Luc Ponty songs of all time. And we've got In Spite of All. 2 great Holdsworth guest appearance featured tracks, and the rapport between Ponty and Holdsworth is just outstanding. And as much as I love Nostalgia, it's one of the greatest Ponty songs of all time. I'm going with In Spite of All. I just think it's a really good song, and Holdsworth just absolutely tears it up, and I love it. I absolutely love that track. Just the way the notes all bend together, and it's more like a wailing. I just love it. It's just I think Holdsworth sounds absolutely amazing on that track. And like I said, anytime Ponce and Holdsworth got together, it's going to be good. And the very fact that we got 3 albums from this collaboration tells you something there, because Holdsworth has always been a guy who he would do one thing and then move on to something else. He wouldn't necessarily go back with the same person. He would usually just move on to other things. So the very fact that we got 3 albums with Holdsworth and Ponce, that tells you something. So there you have it. Jean-Luc Ponty, individual choice. Excellent guest appearance from Holdsworth and some amazing guitar playing from the man himself. Absolutely love it. One of my favorite Holdsworth guest appearances. So we move on to the next one, and this one came out in 1988, and it's an album from one of the greatest bass players of all time, the one and only Stanley Clarke, and this one is called If This Bass Could Only Talk. Now, Allan Holdsworth is featured on one track on this album, and even though it's only one track, this track really cooks. It's red hot. And Stanley Clarke, as I mentioned already, one of the greatest bass players of all time, best known for his legendary work with Return to Forever. But Holdsworth and Clarke together, whew, that's dynamite stuff. It really is. And then you add Stuart Copeland from The Police on drums. Why didn't we get a full album of these 3? That's a power trio in itself. My goodness. And Holdsworth and Clarke, it's just magic. It really is. And Holdsworth's solo on Stories to Tell is just ripping. It's almost like his guitar playing is this red hot blade and just cuts through everything. Tremendous stuff. Absolutely tremendous. Really, really wished we got a full album with Holdsworth and Clarke. Can you imagine what that would have been like? Oh my God. One thing I have to say about Allan Holdsworth is, you know, solo career, excellent. Lots of great solo albums. Sideman work, excellent. Guest appearances, excellent. But there were a few missed opportunities there, of really getting something with Holdsworth. But such a stubborn horse. He was always quite content just to keep doing different things. But I really, really wished we got something, solid with Stanley Clarke and Allan Holdsworth. A whole album with those two playing off each other would have been one of the greatest albums ever made. But his guitar playing on this track, Stories to Tell, on If This Bass Could Only Talk, dynamite. Absolute dynamite. It's a great album anyway, but having Holdsworth on that one track just makes it all the better. So there you have it, Stanley Clarke, If This Bass Could Only Talk. What a track. What a track. Absolute banger, in my opinion. So we move on to the next Allan Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 1990, and this one is called Steve Chavoni, Blue Tav. Now, the track that Holdsworth plays on is called Tsunami, and it's quite an appropriate title for this album, Tsunami, because Holdsworth and Cavoni together, it's just red hot. Holdsworth really rocks it up on this track. You go, wow. Oh my God. Absolutely incredible. It really is. And you didn't really get to see Allan Holdsworth play with many horn players much. Obviously, the soft machine guys, like, Elson Dean, of course. But Steve Cavalloni is very much a different beast as far as a sax player. He plays all the woodwinds, tenor sax and soprano sax and alto. He plays clarinet as well, but he also plays Iwi as well, and he plays Iwi on this track. And the interplay and the rapport between Allan Holdsworth and Steve Cavalloni. Whew. I remember first listening to that track, Tsunami, from this album. I thought the whole stereo was going to catch fire. The guitar playing was mental. It was just absolutely incredible. And like I said, Holdsworth, that one track that he's featured as a guest, he always steals the show. Always steals the show. He is the showstopper of guitar playing. He could go in there and have the best track of the entire album. And there's only a little handful of guys, as far as guitar players, who can do that. And he's one of them. And it's an appropriate name, Tsunami, because it is like that. It's just like this big wave of guitar playing that just blows your head off. Like, what the hell am I listening to? It's like, wow, absolutely nuts in a good way. Just absolutely incredible. So there you have it. Steve Cavalloni, Blue Tav, excellent Holdsworth guest appearance, and some of his most red hot guitar playing you will ever hear. Absolutely love this one, and another favorite Holdsworth guest appearance of mine. Just absolutely dynamite stuff, in my opinion. So we move on to the next one, and this one came out in 1990 also. And this one's not very well known, but obviously the guys who are featured on this album, if you're fans of those guys, then you probably know this album. And this one is called Andrea Marcelli, Silent Will. Now, just look at that list of names there. You've got Allan Holdsworth, Mike Stern, John Patitucci, Bob Berg, and Mitch Foreman, and Wayne Shorter. That is like the mother of dream teams. That would be like someone giving me a massive budget and say, who would you like to have on your album? I probably will pick those guys because that is some serious, serious star power. Really is. Now, Andrea Marcelli is a drummer slash percussionist slash multi-instrumentalist. He is super talented, and he put together this project to feature some of his favorite musicians and some of his closest friends. And this album featured Allan Holdsworth. Now, this album is probably not well known to some people, but it's really good, you know. And Holdsworth is featured on 3 tracks. And the highlight for me of those 3 tracks is having Allan Holdsworth, Wayne Shorter, and John Patitucci together. Does it get any bigger or better than that? Wayne Shorter and Allan Holdsworth together. Ah! It's just unbelievable. And then you got John Patitucci on bass from the Chick Corea Electric Band slash Chick Corea Acoustic Band. Mind-blowingly awesome. So the 3 tracks that Holdsworth is featured on, Silent Will is Final Project, Love Remembered, and Lights. Holdsworth is doubling on guitars and synths, so he adds a different flavor. Most of his appearances as a guest, he usually just plays like straight guitar, so it's a little bit of a different flavor. He's playing synths, but he absolutely smokes it on Silent Wheel. And hearing Shorter and Holdsworth trading solos doesn't get any better than that. And John Patitucci, although he doesn't really solo, you can still hear him. He's still got a presence, but you know, he just plays great as well. And from my understanding, I don't think Holdsworth and Patitucci, other than this album, I don't think they ever recorded together. Another missed opportunity. Can you imagine what a Holdsworth album with Patitucci and Dave Weckl? Imagine what that would have been like. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. As I said, Holdsworth is on 3 tracks on Silent Wheel, and the standouts for me is Final Project and Love Remembered. I just love them just because it's Wayne Shorter and Holdsworth together. Doesn't get any better than that. And the whole album, aside from the 3 Holdsworth tracks, it's just loaded with great music and lots of star power. Just top stuff. If you can find this album, it's not an easy one to find, but if you can buy it, you won't regret it. It's so good, and the 3 Holdsworth tracks for me are the highlight of this album. So there you have it. Andrea Marcelli, Silent Will, excellent Holdsworth guest appearance, and another favorite of mine. Absolutely love it. What an album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1993, and this one is called Oneness. So Oneness is, you could say, like a follow-up to Silent Will, and Holdsworth is this time featured on 2 tracks, and equally as good as the 3 tracks that he appeared on Silent Will. Just absolutely amazing. And he's on 2 tracks, which are Moon and You Have to Wait, which are both good. I think I like You Have to Wait because Holdsworth creates this brooding soundscape on his guitar, and Andrea Marcelli plays clarinet. And it's so haunting and so menacing and dark and brooding. And even though Holdsworth at times doesn't solo, his chord work is so profound and has such a presence to it. And wow, it's just go and listen to it. You'll know what I mean. It is really, really good. And it's not often you hear Holdsworth playing alongside a clarinet. So it's a different kind of flavor, different kind of dynamic, but very, very good and very enjoyable. Moon's great, but I think I like You Have to Wait just a little bit more. I think it's a really good track. So there you have it. Andrea Marcelli won this, just like Silent Will, loaded with star power. So, you've got Mike Maneri and Bendick from Steps Ahead. You've got Ralph Towner, Allan Holdsworth, Chuck Loeb, Gary Thomas, and Mitch Foreman, and Mark Johnson, and Gary Willis, and Jimmy Johnson. If that doesn't convince you to buy that album, I don't know what will, but highly recommend you check that out. It's a really good album, loaded with star power, lots of great music, but the 2 Holdsworth tracks really stand out to me, especially You Have to Wait. Absolutely brilliant. So there you have it, Andrea Marcelli. Excellent Holdsworth guest appearance. So we move on to the next Allan Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one also came out in 1993, and this one is called Chad Wackerman, The View. Now, obviously, Allan Holdsworth and Chad Wackerman have been playing together for many, many years. Holdsworth played on Wackerman's first album called 40 Reasons. So he played on all of that album. Now, on The View, Holdsworth still plays a big part, but there's also another guitarist on this album, and that is the amazing Carl Verheyen from Supertramp. And the interesting thing about The View is with 40 Reasons, Holdsworth was a dominant part of that album. This album, he is a dominant part of it, but it's different. You know, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more jazzier, whereas 40 Reasons was a bit more rockier. But he's on quite a lot of this album. He's a featured guest, and getting to hear him playing alongside another horn player, this time trumpeter Walt Fowler, you know, it's an interesting treat. You know, it's different. So he is featured on Close to Home, great track. Empty Suitcase, he's on that as well, another great track. Introduction and Starry Nights and On the Edge and Days Away. Some really, really good playing from Holdsworth. And, you know, he's more in jam mode, so to speak, but it's some good playing from Holdsworth. So the standouts for me on The View are Close to Home, Empty Suitcase, and Moments, and Days Away. Some really good playing from Holdsworth, and Chad Wackerman and Allan Holdsworth always work well together. They are a great combo, and they've made some really good music together, and their association, you know, stretches back like years and years. And, you know, they work so well together. You know, they're like telepathic. You know, they start and finish each other's musical sentences, and it's some tremendous stuff came out of their collaboration, in my opinion. So there you have it. Chad Wackerman, The View. Excellent Holdsworth guest appearance and very enjoyable as well. Certainly equally as good as 40 Reasons, in my opinion. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 1985, and this one is called Gongzilla Suffer. Now, Gongzilla is an offshoot of Pierre Melin's Gong, so Pierre Melin is not actually featured on this one. It's his brother Benoit Melin on vibraphone, and we've also got Bon Lazaga and Hansford Rowe. And Gongzilla is a shred fest of an album, and Holdsworth is featured on 4 tracks, and there is some jaw-dropping guitar play on Gongzilla Suffer. And I love how the first track, which is called Gongzilla, I love the way it starts. You hear this big dum, dum, dum. It's almost like Godzilla's coming, and it goes into do 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 do. Oh, it's a dynamite opener, and you know, any guitarist who can hold their own with Holdsworth, you know, you deserve a gold medal. And to hear Bon Lazaga and Holdsworth trading guitar riffs with each other, it's just mad, absolutely mad. And Gongzilla Suffer is a lot more rockier than some of the other Gong albums that featured Holdsworth, but it's still Gong, but it's just a little bit different. So Holdsworth is featured on 4 tracks: Gongzilla, Bad Habits, Almost You, and Allen Key. It's 4 outstanding tracks, some really good guitar playing from Holdsworth. Absolutely love it. Just amazing. And Holdsworth really rocks it up and really shreds it up. Absolutely brilliant. So the standouts for me from Gongzilla Suffer are Gongzilla and Allen Key and Bad Habits, but all of it is excellent. just one of my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearances. So there you have it. Gongzilla, Suffer, another great Holdsworth guest appearance, in my opinion, and absolutely love it. So we move on to the next Allan Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 1997, and this one is called Steve Hunt's From Your Heart and Your Soul. So Steve Hunt, of course, is a long-time Holdsworth keyboardist who played in his band and played on one of Holdsworth's albums called Hard Hat's Area. And Holdsworth is featured on one track on Steve Hunt's album called Ring It Out. And it's pretty much a continuation of the style from Hard Hat's Area. Holdsworth is all over this album and he really takes charge. And it's a great sound, great production. Steve Hunt, of course, is an amazing keyboardist, and the rapport between Holdsworth and Hunt is legendary. And it pretty much sounds like the lost track from Hard Hat's Area. It's very technical, it's very well paced. Some spots are very atmospheric, but it's a very enjoyable track. And as I said, Holdsworth's only on one track, but he really leaves his mark all over Steve Hunt's album, and they just work really well together. And this easily could have been on Hard Hat Area. It's certainly got that sort of atmospheric style, and it's a really good track. So there you have it, Steve Hunt's From Your Heart and Your Soul. Very enjoyable Holdsworth guest appearance, and not an easy album to find, but highly recommend you check it out. And if you're a fan of Hard Hat Area, then you know what to expect with this one. But still very good. I really like this one a lot. It's a little bit short, but still straight to the point. I think this one's like probably about maybe 5 or 6 minutes long, but it's still a very enjoyable track. So there you have it. Steve Hunt, From Your Heart and Your Soul. Very enjoyable Holdsworth guest appearance. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 2003, and this one is called Atlantis Pray for Rain. Now, Atlantis is a progressive rock band from the US, and it's fronted by bassist and multi-instrumentalist Ken Jacques, and it's a really good album. It's not very well known to a lot of prog fans, but it's very enjoyable. It's very proggy, as you'd expect, and it's kind of cool to hear Holdsworth playing prog again. He hadn't done that since UK, but very good, and some great guitar playing from Holdsworth. And the track, although it's a little bit short, I think it's like just under 4 minutes, but it's very good. And Holdsworth, just like always, he rips it up. And yeah, it's a very good track. And, you know, it's worth buying just for that track alone. But the whole album is decent, but that track alone, Oceans to Cross, is just chef's kiss, in my opinion. So there you have it, Atlantis, Pray for Rain. Not an easy album to find, but highly recommended for all prog rock fans, but very enjoyable. And Atlantis would slowly disband and transform into another band that Holdsworth also played with, which we'll talk about very shortly. But this is really good stuff. You know, it's great to hear Holdsworth in the prog environment once again. And he just solos, but you can't get any better than that. Holdsworth doing his thing on the guitar and just leaving his Holdsworth magic for everyone to hear. And he just makes everything around him sound amazing. So there you have it. Atlantis, Pray for Rain. Good stuff, in my opinion. Love it. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance. And this is one of my all-time favorites, and it's from my all-time favorite keyboardist, and this one came out in 2004, and this one is called Derek Sherinian Mythology. Derek Sherinian, he's worked with some of the greatest guitar players in the world: Brett Garside, Yngwie Malmsteen, John Petrucci from Dream Theater, to name a few. But Holdsworth and Derek Sherinian is just magic. It really is. And Holdsworth and Derek Sherinian, they work really well together. And Holdsworth is featured on two tracks. He's featured on Day of the Dead and One Way or the Other, both burning tracks. You know, you've got Derek Sherinian, Allan Holdsworth, Tony Franklin, the legendary Simon Phillips, and the legendary Jerry Goodman from Mother Hisham Orchestra. Holdsworth, Simon Phillips, and Jerry Goodman together. That's big boy stuff. That is big boy stuff. And then you add Derek Sherinian to the mix. Doesn't get any better than that. That's a powerhouse of a band. And Derek Sherinian knows how to put these all-star lineups together, and he does it here. I love Day of the Dead. It's great, but I'm going with One Way or the Other because, you know, Jerry Goodman and Holdsworth. There's that violin dynamic again. Holdsworth working really well with violin players, as always, and they just really shred it up. And Derek Sherinian, as a keyboard player, he operates like a guitarist. So you think it's Holdsworth, but it's actually Sherinian as well. But who cares? Those guys just, what a team. What a team. Just absolutely love it. It's a great album anyway. But once again, you add Holdsworth, just makes it even better. So there you have it. Derek Sherinian, Mythology, top stuff, and one of my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearances. Absolutely love this one. And Derek Sherinian, he's my favorite keyboardist. Put Allan Holdsworth, one of my all-time favorite guitarists. Put those two together. Enough said. That's all I'm going to say. Enough said. So there you have it. Derek Sherinian, Mythology. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one could very well be probably my all-time favorite. And this one came out in 2005, and this one is called K2, Book of the Dead. Now, imagine if Holdsworth and UK got back together and they added Peter Gabriel and Tony Banks from Genesis. This is what it would sound like. This is Allan Holdsworth returning to the prog world with a vengeance, and K2 to me is like kind of like the Lost UK album. You know, imagine if UK got back together in the 21st century. This is kind of what it would sound like. And Allan Holdsworth has a massive part on this album. Now, Book of the Dead is a concept album about, you know, mummification and all sorts of things from Egypt. So it's a concept album and it's made up of like various chapters, but Holdsworth just comes in and takes charge. And for me, this is some, if not some of his best guitar playing ever as a guest, and absolutely love it. And he's on 4 tracks, but they're like 4 epics on their own. And you got Ryo Okamoto from Spock as well. It just doesn't get any better than that. The sounding production does sound like UK, and obviously you got the UK guitarist Holdsworth playing away. It's just excellent. So the 4 tracks that Holdsworth appears on Book of the Dead is Chapter 1, Infinite Voyage, Chapter 2, Mirror to the Spirits, Chapter 3, The Edge of Light, which kind of sounds similar to UK's In the Dead of Night. You know that do 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 do. You know, it sounds like that. And you got the Chapter 5, Clone of Antiquity. Beautiful stuff. Holdsworth just massive presence all over this album. Lots of great soloing, chops galore, and damn, he really goes to town on this one. Without a doubt, probably my favorite Holdsworth guest appearance out of all of his guest appearances, and there's a lot of them, but this one is definitely up there for me. And wow, just chills, just absolute chills. Doesn't get any better than that. And the standouts for me for Holdsworth's guitar playing is Chapter One, Infinite Voyage, and Chapter Three, The Edge of Light. Just kick-ass Holdsworth guitar playing, in my opinion. So there you have it, K2, Book of the Dead. Probably my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearance. Absolutely love it. What an album. So we move on to the next one, and this one came out also in 2005, and this one is called David Hines Nebula. Now, David Hines is a really good bass player, not that well known, and Allan Holdsworth is featured on two tracks, and he really rips it up. And again, this kind of sounds like Allan Holdsworth's hard hat area, and it's got longtime Holdsworth collaborator, keyboardist Steve Hunt. He's also plays on this album. And the two tracks that Holdsworth is featured on, Nebula, they're really good. They're really, really good, though. And the two tracks are called Skippy and Antila, both enjoyable tracks. Probably like Skippy a lot more. He just really, like rips it up, and he just sounds excellent. And Holdsworth and Hines together, just absolutely magic. Just absolutely works well with those two. And Holdsworth's played with a lot of great bass players. Jeff Berlin, you know Jimmy Johnson, Scully Severinsen, and the late great Dave Carpenter, Paul Carmichael, just to name a few, and of course the great Tony Levin as well. Holdsworth's played with them all, and those two just work very well together. And it's an album that's not really that well known as far as like Holdsworth guest appearances are concerned, but it's definitely worth checking out. If you really want to, get all of the Holdsworth guest appearances, this is definitely one I would recommend. So there you have it, David Hines Nebula. Excellent Holdsworth guest appearance, and not a very well known one, I would say, but still very good nonetheless. So there you have it, David Hines Nebula. Very enjoyable and underrated Holdsworth guest appearance. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this is another favorite of mine. And this one came out in 2007, and this one is called Planet X Quantum. Now, from what I've heard, Holdsworth was originally meant to play on the whole album, but Holdsworth rubbed off all his guitar parts because he wasn't happy with them. And we managed to get two tracks saved, which are Desert Girl and The Thinking Stone. Two excellent tracks. I love Desert Girl. Desert Girl is just excellent. And Holdsworth and Derek Sherinian, and now you got Virgil Donati in the mix. Doesn't get any better than that. And, Holdsworth and Donati would go on to play together in, various different situations. But I think Holdsworth in Planet X with Derek Sherinian and Virgil Donati doesn't get any better than that. Absolutely love both of those tracks, but Desert Girl is my favorite track of the two Holdsworth featured tracks. Just absolutely burning guitar playing. So there you have it, Planet X Quantum. Excellent stuff, and another favorite Holdsworth guest appearance of mine. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 2007, and this one is called Jean-Luc Ponty, the Akantama Experience. Now, Holdsworth and Ponty, as I mentioned already, absolutely legendary, made some excellent music. Enigmatic Ocean, Individual Choice, and now the Akatama Experience. And Holdsworth this time, surprisingly, is only on one track, which is called Points of No Return. But it's a very good track. It's very modern, so it's a lot more up to date. The two other ones were, of the time. Still sound excellent, but Points of No Return, by this point, Holdsworth and Ponty are a lot older, a lot more seasoned, and a lot more mature as players, but they still sound great together. And Holdsworth is at his best playing with violin players. And this track in particular is probably the most jazziest track that Holdsworth and Ponty have ever recorded together, but still wonderful stuff. And just wished we could have had one album where Holdsworth played on all of it with Jean-Luc Ponty, because I just think those two work so well together. And I would have loved to have seen Ponty maybe guest on a Holdsworth album, perhaps. I think that would have been a lot of fun too. So there you have it. Jean-Luc Ponty, the Akatama Experience, the third and sadly final album from Ponty and Holdsworth, but excellent stuff, just absolutely excellent. So we move on to the next one, and this one is a little bit different, but still very enjoyable. This one came out in 2010, and this one is called Gary Husband, Dirty and Beautiful, Volume 1. So, Holdsworth and Gary Husband, their collaboration is legendary, and they've played together in many different situations. And this is more of a project of Gary Husband, so it's got all like different musicians, as you can see: Holdsworth, Jan Hammer, Jimmy Johnson, John McLaughlin, Steve Hackett. Good stuff there. And Mark King from Level 42. So it's an all-star lineup, and Holdsworth is featured on 3 tracks, which are Leave 'Em On, Between the Sheets of Music, and Boulevard Bolognio. 3 outstanding tracks. Holdsworth doing what he always does best, and that's coming in and dominating the proceedings. And he's got a massive presence and some really good guitar playing. And the standouts for me on Dirty and Beautiful, Volume 1, are Leave 'Em On and Between the Sheets of Music. But some excellent, tasty guitar playing. And Holdsworth and Gary Husband always work well together. They got such a great rapport together, much like Holdsworth and Wackerman. You know, Holdsworth and Husband, they start and finish each other's musical sentences, and their playing together is like telepathic, just like Holdsworth and Wackerman. Just absolutely excellent. So there you have it. It's Gary Husband, Dirty and Beautiful, Volume 1. Excellent stuff. And we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance. And this one came out in 2012. And this one is called Gary Husband and Dirty and Beautiful, Volume 2. So this is kind of like a follow-up to Volume 1 from Gary Husband. And he's on one track, and it's a reworking of Tony Williams' Lifetime track, Fred. This one's called Fred 2011. Holdsworth and Jan Hammer together. Say no more. Say no more. Doesn't get any better than that. And it's a nice reworking. It's not much different to the original, just a little bit more modern, a bit more up to date, a bit more better production. Nothing wrong with the original. Still great production as well. But yeah, absolutely enjoyable. Probably the best track of Dirty and Beautiful Volume 2, as far as I'm concerned. All good anyway, but I think the Holdsworth track is probably my favourite of Dirty and Beautiful Volume 2. So there you have it. Gary Husband, Dirty and Beautiful Volume 2. Absolutely very enjoyable Holdsworth guest appearance. And the treat for me is hearing Holdsworth and Jan Hammer together. Doesn't get any better than that. So we move on to the next Holdsworth guest appearance, and this one came out in 2017, and this one is called MSM Schmidt Life. So this would turn out to be the final ever recording of Holdsworth. And as we all know, Holdsworth sadly passed away in 2017. So this was released digitally just after his passing. And I believe this was recorded in 2015. So Holdsworth is featured on two tracks. The first track is called Trance, which features Allan Holdsworth on guitar, Jimmy Haslip on bass from Yellow Jackets, and is also played and collaborated with Holdsworth, and he's also played with a number of other great bands. Scott Kinsey on keyboards from Tribal Tech, and the legendary Dave Weckl on drums from the Chick Corea Electric Band and the Chick Corea Acoustic Band. And we've also got here on soprano sax, Katis Buckingham and MSM Schmidt on synthesizers as well. Scott Kinsey, Allan Holdsworth, Dave Weckl, and Jimmy Haslip together. That is a fantastic four. You know, that is a powerhouse quartet. And Weckl and Holdsworth together, and Haslip and Scott Kinsey, that is a true fusion dream team as far as I'm concerned. Just amazing stuff. And the other track that Holdsworth is featured on is called Vista, which features Andy Mine on piano, John DeVerisa on trumpet, Emerson Schmidt on synthesizers, Virgil Donati on drums, Holdsworth, of course, on guitar, and Jimmy Haslip on bass. Another great track as well. Excellent stuff. Holdsworth working really well with Donati and Haslip. Absolutely love it. It's a really good track, but I'm leaning towards Trance. You know, Weckl and Kinsey with Holdsworth and Haslip as well. Doesn't get any better than that. And even though Holdsworth is only featured on two tracks of this album, they're the highlights. As I said, all of Holdsworth's guest appearances are the highlights of the album, as far as I'm concerned. Just, he really knows how to leave a lasting impression. And it's sad that this is the final recording we got of Holdsworth, as far as like one of the last ones before he passed away. But wow, he really goes out like a true badass. And you know, when you get Holdsworth surrounded with top players of his caliber, you know you're going to get the absolute best. Absolutely love this so much. So there you have it. MSM Schmidt Life. Excellent stuff. Love it. So, which Holdsworth guest appearance do I think is the best one? Well, I love all of these albums. They're all good. They're all different. That's the beauty of all of these, you know, guest appearances. They're all diverse. They're all very different. But if I had to choose which one, that's my all-time favorite, I would probably go with K2, Book of the Dead. You know, to hear Allan Holdsworth in a prog environment once again doesn't get any better than that. And to me, this is kind of like the closest thing we got to a UK sort of scenario with Holdsworth. Even though Holdsworth never reunited with the UK, just to hear him playing that style of music that UK made back in the 70s was a nice welcome treat. And, you know, Holdsworth played a massive part on this album. He wasn't technically a member of K2, he was just like a special guest, but he made such a massive impression. And having him back playing prog just reminded me why UK was such a special album I love all of his guest appearances. Enigmatic Ocean. Individual Choices. All those albums by Ponte, and all the Derek Sherinian stuff. But this one for me, this is my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearance. It's just tremendous, and Holdsworth is just on top form. So there you have it. K2, Book of the Dead, my all-time favorite Holdsworth guest appearance. Absolutely love this one so much, and I still listen to it a lot to this day. But Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean is right up there, but this is my favorite of all time, and probably the one I consider to be his best playing ever as a guest, in my opinion. So there you have it, K2, Book of the Dead. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favorite Allan Holdsworth guest appearance? Is it Jean-Luc Ponty, Enigmatic Ocean, Individual Choice, the Akonittima Experience, MSM Schmidt, K2 Book of the Dead, Chad Wackerman, The View, Derek Sherinian Mythology, Planet X, Quantum, Andrea Marcelli, Silent Will, or Andrea Marcelli, Oneness? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favorite Allan Holdsworth guest appearances. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.